Welcome. You're listening to The Best of Investing. I'm your host, Edward Brown. Our phone number is 888-912-1190. Use that number to answer the trivia questions for a 5-pack tanning certificate given away during this show. And that certificate's not sponsored by the radio station, but by Tan Bella Tanning Salon with 2 locations in San Francisco and 1 in Marin. Today, we do have a special guest, Paul Van Every. And give a little intro to Paul. First of all, his company is Investment Property Exchange Services, Inc. Let's see here. Okay, so Paul is a Senior Vice President for Investment Property Exchange Services, Inc. And he oversees the Santa Clara, San Mateo, Santa Cruz, and Monterey County for IPX 1031 sales. With over 20 years of management, commercial transactional real estate, and 1031 experience, most recently as National Account Manager with Chicago Title National Commercial Services, Paul brings multi-layered real estate expertise and insight to IPX 1031, and Paul received his BA from San Jose State University. Hey, Paul, welcome to The Best of Investing.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, so I guess I figured out what IPX stands for, Investment Property Exchange. All
Yes.
right. Let's first talk about, most of our audience is somewhat sophisticated, so they know about 1031 exchanges. I'm presuming that. What are some common exchange misconceptions?
Absolutely. Well, there is a number of things. Because there is so much gray area to a 1031 exchange, there is times that there are misconceptions on what is required to do what we would call a fully tax-deferred exchange. And one thing that everyone has to remember with a 1031 exchange is that you're not just eliminating taxes, you're deferring taxes. So that's one of the first misconceptions, that people think, oh, my taxes are going to just go away. You're actually just kind of kicking the can down the road with those taxes. So you are deferring them. So that's one of the first misconceptions that most commonly happens. The second thing is as far as what qualifies for a 1031. A lot of times people think that it has to be the same type of property. If I sell a residential property, I have to buy a residential property. Yeah. That's not true. You can buy all types of real estate as long as it's an investment real estate. So you can't buy a primary residence. You can't buy stock, you can't buy REITs, but you can sell a residential building and residential property and buy a commercial building. That is okay. You could sell a multifamily building and buy a retail building. So the ability to buy other property types is okay to do. It's not.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You mentioned about like not being able to buy REITs, but they have come up with the DSTs, Delaware Statutory Trust, which is sort of like a REIT. I mean, I look at it as like a mutual fund of real estate properties.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. The DST is very much like a REIT. And actually now there is something called a DST UPREIT, a 721 UPREIT, which allows you to start with a DST, hold it in that DST for 2 years, and then you can actually transfer into a REIT and go into stocks. So that is something that's relatively new.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, because it's so funny. I wasn't thinking of REITs that get traded on the stock exchange because that's stock.
Yeah.
It's just that they happen to have. What can you trade into? Let's say there was a REIT set up specifically just to own real estate that was not traded on the stock market. Can you exchange your apartment building for that?
No, it has to be. So it has to start into the DST. So you have to go into real estate first. But after seasoning for 2 years in that DST, you can then go into a qualified REIT at that point.
Interesting. It's kind of interesting how they make you jump through that hoop, but okay.
They do. But it is good for investors that are looking to diversify or no longer want to deal with the management headaches.
Exactly. We'll talk more about that when we get back. All right, here's our first trivia question. And again, just a reminder to Paul, if you know the answer, don't say anything quite yet. When we come back from break, we'll see if you know the answer. Which bird has no eyeballs? Kind of an interesting question. Call 888-912-1190. The first caller with the correct answer wins that tanning certificate. Which bird has no eyeballs? Do want to make a mention here for Transcendence Theater. They've got some awesome Broadway shows in Sonoma in an outdoor theater. I always love going to them myself. Check out transcendencetheater.com and check out the various shows that they have. All right, stay with us. You're listening to The Best of Investing. Don't touch that dial. We are going to be right back. Welcome back to the Best of Investing. I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with my special guest, Paul Van Every, and we're talking about 1031 exchanges. Let's see, Paul, when we left off, you were talking about the fact that with the 1031 exchange, out of, let's say, as an example, an apartment building where you're managing it yourself, into some asset that's allowed to be exchanged into where you don't have the management headaches.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is what's really popular right now with the 1031 exchanges, that folks are looking for their options to not have to manage. DST is a great option for that. Triple net properties, another great option, where you would be buying into a large corporation, maybe a McDonald's or a Bank of America or someone like that. They actually manage the property, and this would be a triple net, so that you would have that ability to just receive a check every month and not have to worry about those headaches of dealing with what we call the three T's: the tenants, toilets, and trash. People get very tired of those. So there's definitely
the downside, though, is that you're trusting someone else. You don't really know which property.
You are, and the DST especially. You are taking, with any real estate investment, obviously there's risk, but with the DST you do have some risk. It's always important to go with a known commodity. I have some really good folks that I work with personally. That's what they specialize in. So they do it on a daily basis. So I trust them, and I make sure when I'm talking with my 1031 clients that I give them the right people to do their research, because it is important that folks, really do their research on the property they want to go into. Because again, like you mentioned, the DST, you're at the mercy of the DST. They manage the property, they own the property, they are going to determine what to do with the property. So you want to make sure you go with a known good operator.
It's interesting because I have a commercial building, and I've been, somewhat tempted toying, let's say, with the idea, because I have a fairly low basis in it. So technically a 1031 exchange would be perfect. One of the concerns I have, though, is the fact that I know my building fairly well, and if I trade into something else, I got to learn about a brand new building with all the hiccups in it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is what a lot of concerns that folks have. There's a number of concerns. Again, kind of going into back to those misconceptions, how much you need to buy. People think that, I only have to reinvest the amount of money that came out of the transaction. That is not the case. You have to buy something equal or greater than your sale price. So that trips people up quite a bit, because in this area and all through, the country, you can have a very expensive real estate, and to have to replace that value can be difficult. And some folks don't want to have to get it, especially in today's market. Interest rates are up, so it's harder to get a loan. Or not only, it could be not necessarily harder to get the loan, but because interest rates are up, what you're going to get for a return is not what you're getting on your current property. So there's a number of things that people.
And the thing is, if I have a loan on my current building now, but I don't want to buy another building and I want to be debt free on it, that's going to create a problem.
It's going to create a problem. There's going to be a taxable situation there, because, for example, if you just take easy numbers, you sold for $1 million and you have a $200,000 loan. So you're going to get $800,000 in cash. If somebody just wants to reinvest that $800,000, it's okay to do that. But you're going to get taxed on that $200,000 difference, since you bought down in value. So that's again a very big misconception. I get that call on a daily basis that, hey, I just want to it's okay to do. And that's the one thing I always let people know. It is absolutely okay to do. Just don't be surprised. You're going to get a tax. You're going to get a tax bill at the end of the year. So
I mean, the whole idea that is to do an exchange is to avoid as much taxes as possible. So anything can be done if you're willing to pay.
Absolutely.
So Paul, what does your company specifically do?
So our company is we advise clients. We'll go through the process of the 1031 exchange. We will basically consult the client and make sure they understand what they're getting into, identify if there's any red flags on their transaction. Now, we're not tax attorneys. We don't give legal or tax advice. We will give them the rules of the 1031 and make sure they understand the rules. And again, identify if there is any potential issues on their transaction. And then we'll handle the actual transaction. So we'll prepare our paperwork to make sure that the transaction is done by the rules. So we prepare the paperwork. The transaction, when the transaction closes, the funds will come to us. There needs to be a neutral third party, and that's what we do.
Make sure they don't receive boot.
Make sure that the other term is constructive receipt. You don't want to receive the money because once you receive the money, and that's one of the worst calls we can get is that, hey, I closed escrow yesterday and now I want to do an exchange. Well, unfortunately, you're too late. We can't go back. So we always advise them, hey, get that thing set up as soon as possible so that we can, have everything in place and ready to go when you close escrow.
Okay. And when we come back, we also want to talk about reverse exchanges and something called improvement exchanges. I thought that was kind of interesting. I didn't realize that one. All right. I do want to make a mention here also for Action Whitewater Adventures provides the best rafting experience in the North Bay from beginners to more advanced rafters. Check them out at actionwhitewater.com for rafting trips. And let's see. Also, Mountain Mike's Pizza in San Rafael. Best pizza around. So funny. Every time I do their ad, I think, oh man, I could just deal with a pizza. Go for a pizza slice right now. So it's amazing. Their pepperoni pizza, they throw a lot of pepperoni on it. That's my favorite. Pizza the way it ought to be. All right, now here's our trivia question for the tanning certificate, which by the way is worth over $100. What was John Wayne's last movie? What was his last movie? All right. Call 888-912-1190. Again, the first caller with the correct answer wins that tanning certificate, which, by the way, is, again, worth over $100. What was John Wayne's last movie? And interestingly enough, I had learned about this trivia, and then I went and I rented it, and it was actually pretty enjoyable. He was a little older, of course, but that was his last movie. All right. Stay with us. You're listening to The Best of Investing with Edward Brown and special guest Paul Van Every to talk about 1031 exchanges. Don't touch that dial. We're going to be right back. Welcome back to The Best of Investing one more time. I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with my guest Paul Van Every to talk about 1031 exchanges. Let's do our trivia question. What was John Wayne's last movie? What do you think, Paul?
I honestly couldn't tell you.
It's not that well known, actually. It's called The Shootist.
Okay, I never heard of that one.
Yeah, right. He plays an older guy, who's, again, kind of a Western type of theme to it. And it's a good movie, actually. All right, so we're talking 1031 exchanges here. So explain what a reverse exchange is and what an improvement exchange is, please.
Absolutely. So obviously we're in an area that has a very tight market. So a reverse exchange really gives you the opportunity to. So one of the things in the 1031 exchanges that everyone worries about is the identification period, which is the first 45 days of your exchange. When you close escrow, you have to identify what you intend to purchase on your replacement side within 45 days. And that scares a lot of people away because, again, we're in a tight market in the Bay Area. It's really hard sometimes to find the right property. You don't want to overpay for a property you don't love. So the reverse exchange actually allows you to go out and buy your replacement property first. So it gives you the ability to get around that 45 days, to not have to worry about that 45-day identification period by going out and buying your replacement property first. There's a unique way we set it up. It's basically called an exchange accommodator trust, which we create, and we create an LLC that's unique to the transaction. We actually act as the buyer. So the money comes to us. We actually buy the property and hold the property in this LLC. During that time, the exchanger still can manage the property. They can rent the property. They own the property. We're just simply holding it so that it does not go into their name. And then at that point, their exchange begins and they have 180 days to sell their existing building to pay themselves back. So it's really just taking the whole exchange process and flipping it over and going, just in exactly what it says in reverse. You're buying the new property first. What
happens if when you get closer to that 180 days and you just haven't been able to sell the property?
So that the worst case scenario in a reverse exchange is you're stuck with two properties. If you aren't able to sell your existing now, that time frame, if you get past 180 days, you're not going to be in trouble for anything. You're just simply now we release the property back to you on day 181, and now you have two properties. So that could be your worst case scenario. Now, the other thing that's difficult on reverse exchanges is getting financing, and that is because we are acting as the buyer. So lenders can freak out a little bit and not understand what's trying to be done here. We have lenders we work with, and we have lenders that are familiar with it, so they understand. It's a short-term loan usually because Again, it's only up to the 180 days that we potentially will need to hold it. So it can be done. It just, again, it needs to be done in advance. You don't want to have a last.
Pacific Private Money, one of our sponsors, is one of those companies that
Absolutely. And we are having that discussion next week. So definitely a very good opportunity. Yes, can it be a little bit, difficult? Absolutely, but it can be done. And it is, in the long run, much more beneficial if you're worried about the type of property you're going to find out on the market.
Yeah, because 6 months sounds like a long time, but what happens if you get into escrow and then your buyer backs out?
Yeah, that's, again, it's a tough spot. You do want to have some protections on that. With we have some language that we put in the contract that will state the seller is participating in a 1031 exchange. But again, there's no guarantee if the buyer backs out.
But couldn't your company also, if you're acting as the buyer on the reverse exchange, couldn't you theoretically act as the buyer on the subject property?
There is some things that we could do, but for us, we're just simply holding it. So we have
I understand. I
understood, yeah.
Terminology, but basically, you guys quote buy it under the
yes.
holding, because I guess that kind of moves into the next question. Well, we haven't gone into what are improvement exchanges?
So improvement exchanges are the ability to buy a property of less value than the property you sold and utilize the remaining funds to improve that property. So kind of, again, using those same numbers I used earlier, if you sell something for $1 million, you only can find a new property that's worth $800,000. Yeah. You could utilize that extra $200,000 to improve the property and spend that money within the 180-day time frame to improve it, and it will allow it to be a fully tax deferred exchange. Where that comes into play, again, a lot is if you're not finding the right type of property as your replacement, you might find the ideal location, but it's not. It needs work that allows you to buy that property. Another time, owner users, it's very popular for owner users because they may need to have the new building fixed up to where they can run their business. So the improvement exchange is very beneficial for them as well.
Gotcha. Yeah, I could definitely see that, especially if 180 days to do improvements on it should work pretty well. All right, here is our next trivia question. Who was the last president born in a log cabin? It's a kind of a different kind of question. Call 888-912-1190. Again, the first caller with the correct answer wins that tanning certificate from Tambella Tanning Salon. Who was the last president born in a log cabin? Again, 888-912-1190. First caller with correct answer wins the tanning certificate. When we come back, also want to talk about seller carryback, because I was kind of thinking about that at the same time. I was asking the question about, well, couldn't you, if you run up against the 180 days, you sell a property, seller carryback, blah, 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 blah. We'll get into that in just a minute. All right, audience, stay with us. You're listening to The Best of Investing. I'm Edward Brown, along with my special guest, Paul Van Every. All right, don't touch that dial. We're going to be right back. Welcome back to The Best of Investing. Edward Brown here, along with Paul Van Every, talking about 1031 exchanges. Last trivia question here was, who was the last president born in a log cabin? Who do you think? It's not a president you really think about too much. I don't know if this will give you a hint. He was born in 1831. So it can't be Lincoln because he was born in 1809.
Yeah, and, that was my guess, Lincoln, but
if I remember correctly, this guy got assassinated.
Okay.
I think in 1881, if I'm not mistaken. James Garfield.
Yep.
Just one of those presidents. The last one born in a log cabin. I thought that was kind of interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if the other ones are born in hospitals or houses made out of wood or stone. I don't know. All right, this is kind of a different kind of question. Okay, we're still talking about 1031 exchanges. Explain about seller carrybacks.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously seller carrybacks are pretty popular right now because, again, at the interest rates, people are looking to take advantage of it. And so if you have the ability to do a seller carryback, you might want to earn that 5 or 6% interest from the client who's buying. If you are giving seller carryback. So if you as the seller want to do the seller carryback in a 1031 exchange, it can be very difficult to complete the 1031 exchange. And the reason being is that if you are utilizing exchange funds to fund that note, then those funds are not going to be available for the purchase of your new property. So technically, they are going to be considered boot. Now, the benefit of the seller carryback is that you only are going to get taxed every year on the amount you receive in interest. But eventually, when that seller carry is completely paid off, you're going to get hit with your capital gains tax. So there are some benefits to it, but with an exchange, it creates some difficulties. So what we recommend is if you're thinking about doing seller carryback, you would want to provide those funds from an outside source, whether it's your own funds from your, from an account, whether it's a third party. Somehow you don't want to touch the exchange funds if you're planning on completing a 1031, because again, those funds, if you wanted them to qualify for the 1031, it'd have to be paid off within the 180 days, that note. And usually that's not going to happen. So the options are having that note paid off by the 180th day, having somebody buy that note. So you could sell the note. Technically, if you do a seller carryback, you could sell that note. That's possible. So
it's possible also with if the buyer can't come up with the money now, but probably can come up with it in 3 or 4 months, then a 6-month note might not be the worst thing.
It's not the worst thing, but again, it all depends on when you're purchasing your replacement property as well. Because if you're going to be purchasing your new property before that, it could create a problem because that money's not available. So you would need to come in with your own cash while you're waiting to be paid back. So it's not the end of the world. There are options, and there are things that can be done. We just want to make sure, because we get these calls and people are saying, "Hey, I'm in contract, everything's great. Oh, by the way, I'm doing a seller carryback," and then you have to break the news like, "Oh, you're in contract. This is going to be a problem." So we like to know about that ahead of time, but we also want to make people aware it can create a definite problem on your 1031.
So I guess when you're talking to people, the first thing you ask them is, "Do you have a box of tissues next to you?"
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
quite often.
I can just imagine the horror that people suddenly go, "What?" Right?
Yeah, absolutely. But the good news is if you're on the buy side, if you're looking at your replacement property in a 1031 exchange, it can be seller carryback.
Yeah.
There's no requirement on the buy side where your loan comes from.
No. Could be private, could be a bank. Yeah.
That's not a problem at all. Now, one thing to be careful of, because I know this is also very popular, is if you want to assume into an existing loan on a replacement property, be aware that if you're assuming into the loan, if it's a larger loan than you need, meaning you sell your property again for $1,800,000 comes out, you want to assume into this new loan, and the new loan's $300,000. Well, the loan funds, now you're going to you're only going to utilize $700,000 of the cash that we're holding. So now you have $100,000 of cash left over. There will be a taxable situation on that because the loan funds first, then we put in the cash. So if you're assuming into a loan that's larger than what you need, there could be some taxes in that, which is not the end of the world.
Unless you're going to do the improvement exchange, $100,000 worth of improvements, right?
Exactly. Or put that $100,000 into a DST. So that you can make it a fully tax deferred, because the DST is a good option too if you have leftover cash and you want to place it somewhere.
Right. Yeah, because a lot of times you can't just buy another building for $100,000 or it's not worth it to you. But for a DST,
DST is a good fallback plan if you know you're going to have some leftover money to be able to do that.
We have about a minute to go. What biggest 1031 pitfalls?
Absolutely. In commercial property, the biggest 1031 pitfall are partnerships. Partnerships create a massive problem. And I'll be kind of short on this because I know we're up on time. If you're in a partnership, that's the tax-paying entity is the partnership, because you file a K-1 on that partnership. When you go to buy a new property, what I always hear is people want to break up their partnerships. Partners want to go their own ways. If you do not buy as the same taxpayer as that partnership, that K-1 that's been filing, it's going to be a massive problem. And more than likely, you'll be audited and fail the exchange if you don't buy the new property in that same tax ID number. So
you should
be aware.
Buy it in the entity, and then you could break it up after, right?
You could break it up prior. You could break it up after. There's things that can be done. There's a number of things that can be done. But again, like I've been saying all along, we got to do it early in the process. If we're
I guess
late,
one way too is you could have one partner buy out the other and keep the entity the
absolutely.
same.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's that. Depends on, everyone has a unique situation to their transaction. Everyone's transaction is different. So that's why we're here to consult them on that and give them what their options would be.
In fact, yeah, Paul, why don't you give out your information now before we cut the break? How do
Absolutely.
people get hold of you?
Yeah, so I'm with IPX 1031 Exchange. My phone number is 408-489-4482. And then you can reach me at my email as well at paul.vanevery, that's V as in Victor, ANEVERY, at IPX1031.com.
Perfect. Stay with us, audience. We'll be back with some closing comments. Welcome back to the Best of Investing. Last time for today, I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with my special guest, Paul Vanevery of IPX 1031 Exchange. But we didn't have a trivia question, but I do want to make a mention. Pacific Private Money does have a new fairly new fund. Actually, now it's been around for about 9 months. Pays 10%. Right now, they don't have any plans to change it. Obviously, it could change at some point. They pay quarterly, and it's called their Arrival Fund. If you give them a call, 415-883-2150, and let them know you heard about them on The Best of Investing, they'll give you more information. But basically, they are investing in first deeds of trust on on residential property, primarily primary residences. And then they already have buyers for these loans. So it's like putting it on the conveyor belt, funding the loan, and then selling it. So the funny thing is when people ask, well, what's the default rate? In theory, it's zero because the borrower hasn't even had a chance to make a payment yet. And it's on the new buyer of that loan. So it's like manufacturing loans and selling them. So the reason they can pay as high as they can is because they're charging points and they're keeping the points, and then they're charging the borrowers over 10%, and they're short-term loans. They're 1 year. They're less than 1 year. So nobody wants to keep those loans in existence too long. But check them out, pacificprivatemoney.com, or call them at 415-883-2150. Let them know that you heard about them on the Best of Investing radio show. Paul, let's finish up with you about some of the other pitfalls or partnership type issues where people want to exit out of there.
Again, the partnership is probably the biggest thing. Knowing how you hold title is very important. A number of times I get phone calls, people don't even know how their property is currently titled. Mm-hmm. Having that knowledge is very important. So talking with your escrow title company to get that title report to see how the vesting is held is massively important so that we can, again, identify pitfalls, identify any red flags. We are to consult you guys, to have a consultation, to pick up the phone and call me. There's no fee for that. We do all this for free to make sure we get you as much information and get you as educated as possible prior to going into the 1031 exchange. So my job is to make sure you feel comfortable with everything going on, making sure that you understand, again, identify if there is a red flag and what your options are. We aren't the IRS police. We're not going to say no, but we're going to give you what the rules are and what, again, potential red flag could be if there is one. 75% of my folks I talk to, there's no problems. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. But
it's
when
like
you do
insurance, but having you though is like a good insurance policy to make sure that you don't have any IRS problems.
Absolutely.
It's one of those things that it's like I look at what the potential issues can be, and you're talking so expensive with taxes that I'm sure you guys charge a reasonable fee to go through the transaction, make sure it's done correctly.
It's pretty nominal, to be honest. It's $1,000 for the sale and $250 for the purchase, so it's pretty nominal at the end of the day for what we provide. But you're right. You're looking in California to be paying potentially up to 40% capital gains tax between federal and state. So to do it right is very important. Again, earliest you get me in there when you're even thinking about listing the property. Give me a call and I'll go through it with you. Make sure we get everything set up correctly, ready to go.
Okay. Give out your information one more time, and then we'll go for our thoughts for the day.
Absolutely. So it's Paul Vanevery with IPX 1031 Exchange. Phone number is 408-489-4482, and the email is paul.vanevery@IPX1031 Exchange.
All right. Thank you very much for being our guest. Here's our thoughts for the day. So my wife said I had to grow up, and I didn't say anything. You know, it's hard to talk when you have 14 marshmallows in your mouth. And since the snow came, all my wife does is look through the window. And you know what? If it gets any worse, I'm going to have to let her in. All right, audience. No, I love my wife. She knows that. It's just a little cute joke between us. Okay, audience, tune in next week to The Best of Investing. We're going to be giving away more free prizes for answering trivia questions. Thanks for listening. On behalf of our team, I'm Edward Brown, wishing you the best of investing. So long.